Dear curious listener, you wake up in a room that smells like boiled cabbage and soot. There's lace on every surface. Even the chamber pot has frills. Someone calls you my dear, but you're not sure if it's affection or social strategy. Congratulations. It's 1873. You're officially part of a Victorian family, which means your name doesn't matter anymore. Only your role. Are you the obedient daughter, the distant father, the overworked mother who's been pregnant since 1864? Whether you live in a country manor or a back alley tenement, family is everything, which mostly means everyone knows exactly how you're failing. Tonight, we'll stroll through that strange, stiff, suffocating domestic ecosystem. We'll poke through the drawing room, sit very still at dinner, watch you be judged for sneezing, and perhaps, eventually, you'll fall asleep before someone offers you cod liver oil. So dim the lights, pull up your favorite wool blanket, and get ready to relax inside the stiff, fascinating world of Victorian family life. Don't forget to subscribe and tell me what country you're listening from. You live in a respectable home. That's not a compliment. It's a responsibility. Respectability, in the Victorian sense, is less about comfort and more about optics. It's a performance, daily, rehearsed, and judged mercilessly by neighbors, clergy, and your aunt who writes letters in calligraphy just to criticize people's curtains. Your home doesn't smell warm or inviting. It smells like boiled linens, moral restraint, and whatever your father burned trying to light the coal stove again. The hall is narrow, the wallpaper is floral, and the silence is louder than any welcome. You don't live in a house. You live in a reputation. The parlor, naturally, is never used. That's for visitors, or as your mother calls them, people who might report us to the vicar. The best chairs are reserved for guests and covered in a stiff lace that feels like regret. You may sit there, but only if you're dying or dead. In this world, roles aren't chosen. They're assigned. Your father is the ruler of the household, not in the warm king of the castle sense, more in the distant fog-covered lighthouse sense. He is there, technically, but emotionally miles offshore. He brings in the money, eats the first portion at every meal, and occasionally reads the newspaper out loud as if it were scripture. Your mother is the sun, the glue, and the unpaid manager of everything. She handles schedules, social appearances, spiritual decay, and whether the silver is polished properly for Sunday guests. She is expected to be calm, pious, tireless, and above all, unfailingly cheerful, especially when her nerves are fraying like the hem of last year's curtain. And you, dear child, are a work in progress, or more accurately, a piece of furniture that's being trained to feel guilty. You are seen, sometimes, but rarely heard. You do not speak unless asked a question, preferably one with an answer involving Latin, moral fortitude, or imperial geography. Everything in this household is ruled by structure, not for convenience. Oh no. Structure exists to remind everyone what class you belong to and how precariously you're clinging to it. The sitting room must be tidy enough to host a bishop at a moment's notice. Breakfast is eaten in near silence unless you're quoting scripture. Even the front step must be swept daily because, as everyone knows, dust equals moral failure. At the center of it all is decor, not for comfort, but for signaling. Doilies aren't just decorative. They say, "We are a family of virtue. We starch our linens and our emotions. Curtains matter. Chairs matter. The way your mother folds your father's collar matters. A wrinkle in the tablecloth could derail your sister's marriage prospects. Your spoon placement might be the difference between social advancement and eternal disgrace. And yet, despite the pressure, the household doesn't feel tense. It feels quietly alert, like everyone is waiting to be inspected, because they are. Everyone outside the home is watching, and everyone inside knows it. Neighbors peep through lace-trimmed windows. The postman notices if your doormat is askew. Even the butcher keeps a ledger in his head of who orders cheap cuts too often. The Victorian household is not just a home. It's a stage, a moral showroom, a daily audition for decency. And if you perform well enough, if the baby stays quiet, the soup stays unburnt, and no one asks awkward questions about Aunt Cecily's mysterious trip to Wales, you might just get through the day with your dignity intact, or at least with your name still listed in the church registry without footnotes. So sit up straight, button your collar, smile, but not too broadly. Joy is suspect. And for heaven's sake, don't speak during breakfast. That's not done. Not in this family. Your father is already gone. No one saw him leave. He does that, disappears into the morning fog like a well-dressed ghost with a briefcase full of obligations. If you ask your mother where he's gone, she'll say, "To work," in the same tone one might use to describe an act of national service or ancient penance. No one questions where he goes, what he does, or whether he enjoys it. That's not the point. The point is, he is the man of the house, and therefore, by default, good. In Victorian Britain, a good father is not one who plays games with his children or asks how your poetry lessons are going. A good father is punctual, invisible, and intimidating in exactly the right quantities. He brings in the wages, and you feel them, not as coins, but as rules. Because money in a Victorian household doesn't just buy food. It buys authority. And your father, by virtue of earning the most, holds a level of domestic power that allows him to command silence with a cough. He is a man of few words and many sighs. When he speaks, it's usually to issue a decree. New school books shall be purchased. The meat bill is too high. No child of his will read novels with improper themes, which includes anything French. Emotionally, your father possesses the range of a polite avalanche. He doesn't cry. He doesn't hug. He does occasionally pat your head like you're a very small dog who's almost finished reciting the Book of Psalms. But in his own way, he's present, just indirectly. He reads aloud from David Copperfield after dinner, not because he particularly likes Dickens, but because the act of reading aloud builds character, especially when done in a monotone with poor lighting and a flickering gas lamp. Your father is not expected to understand you. He is expected to raise you, which, in this context, mostly means making you slightly afraid of disappointing him. He is the final judge in all domestic disputes. A frown from him is more effective than a sermon. A raised eyebrow? Catastrophic. If your mother is the keeper of virtue, your father is the executor of judgment. At work, which could be a bank, a factory office, or something involving ledgers and hats, he is a man of industry and quiet repression. He has a colleague named Harold who once made a joke in 1867. No one's quite recovered. He returns home just in time for supper, where he takes the largest slice of meat and reads the newspaper as if it contains divine commandments. You speak only if directly addressed. You chew quietly. You do not slouch. And yet, there's a strange affection in it all. When your father clears his throat before telling a story, usually one involving frostbite, debt, or moral decline, your siblings lean in. When he adjusts his spectacles and fumbles with the tiny print of a Bible verse, the room is silent, reverent. He might not say, "I love you," but he'll tell you the difference between thrift and waste. He'll teach you how to polish your boots with vinegar and backbone. He'll give you the look, that special paternal glance that says, "I'm proud, but I'm not about to say it out loud." That would be French. And then just like that, he disappears again, off to work, or the study, or a slow walk to nowhere in particular, with his hands behind his back and the weight of a household balanced somewhere in the lines of his overcoat. In the Victorian family, a father doesn't need to be warm. He needs to be dependable, and ideally just a little bit feared. Your mother is already awake. She's been awake for 2 hours, though no one noticed, because Victorian mothers are expected to exist in a quiet state of omnipresent competence. She has swept the hearth, boiled the linen water, and counted how many eggs are left, all before you rub the sleep from your eyes. She has had 9 children, 4 are living, 2 are currently crying. 1 is due in April. She has slept on average 4 hours a night since 1861, and yet she is somehow both standing upright and making lace. Your mother is not just a woman. She is a system. She is the moral compass of the home, the spiritual thermostat, the unpaid accountant, the nurse, the laundress, the educator, and the silent shock absorber of everyone else's bad mood. When your father sighs, she translates. When the baby wails, she's already halfway to the cradle. Her dress is simple but clean. Her hands are cracked but steady. And her eyes, well, they flicker with the kind of deep maternal exhaustion that can only be tempered by tea and blind faith. You rarely hear her complain. When she does, it's in code. That's interesting. Means she's appalled. If that's what you think is best, means she absolutely disagrees. And would you like some more bread? Means she's monitoring your spiritual development and your jam intake simultaneously. She is the keeper of all family knowledge. She remembers every birthday, every baptism, every borrowed dish that was never returned. She knows who in the neighborhood is slipping morally and who still waters down their milk. She is watching. She is planning. She is slightly behind on the mending. On Sundays, she leads the charge to church, children polished and combed like unwilling silverware. On Mondays, she is elbows deep in laundry suds, wringing out everyone's sins from their underclothes. Her daily schedule defies logic. After breakfast, she reviews the household accounts. Then she checks the jam inventory, darns 3 socks, instructs your sister on proper piano posture, and reminds you, calmly, not to speak with your mouth full of porridge and doubt. She is expected to be endlessly pious, endlessly patient, and endlessly available. If she were to vanish for even 10 minutes, the entire family would collapse like a poorly folded cravat. And yet, she does have one escape. Every so often, usually after the youngest child mistakes the coal bin for a play area, your mother disappears into the parlor. She draws the curtain just enough to signal that she's resting. But you know what that means. It's not a nap. It's a sherry, a quiet cry, and possibly a moment alone with her favorite embroidery hoop and a hymn book she's pretending to read. This is the Victorian mother's version of a spa day. 15 uninterrupted minutes of nobody needing anything, followed by someone knocking anyway. Despite it all, she holds the household together. The jam may be low, the butter may be locked away for guests, but somehow everyone is fed, everyone is clothed, and everyone still believes, however faintly, that everything is going to be all right. because she hasn't said otherwise. She doesn't just raise children. She maintains standards, moral ones, social ones, linen ones. She is the head of domestic operations and the last line of emotional defense. You may not thank her out loud. That would be unseemly. But you do sit up straighter when she enters the room. And if you're lucky, you get a rare smile. The kind that says, "You didn't ruin the napkins. You didn't mention frogs at dinner. You might just turn out decent after all." In a Victorian home, that's love, and you'll take it. You are a child, which, in Victorian terms, means you are expected to be invisible, useful, and terrifyingly well-behaved. You do not run. You do not shout. You certainly do not question things. You are not here to express yourself. You are here to build character, preferably in silence while wearing very tight boots. Childhood in this house is not a whimsical time of imagination and play. It is a preparation course for respectable adulthood, delivered with a side of boiled cabbage and moral pressure. The day begins with a task, always a task. Maybe it's polishing your father's shoes. Maybe it's folding linen. Maybe it's standing perfectly still while your aunt critiques your posture for 40 minutes. All of it builds discipline, or so you're told. Your job, broadly, is to behave, and to do so convincingly. That means hands folded, hair parted, opinions kept safely locked away until you are at least 30, or married, or preferably both. If you must speak, do it quietly. Use full sentences. Bonus points for quoting scripture, reciting moral poetry, or correcting someone's Latin declension. Fun, as a concept, is not entirely banned, just heavily supervised. You are permitted to play with toys, but only ones that serve a purpose. Building blocks teach geometry. Tea sets reinforce etiquette. Dolls are moral instructors in miniature skirts. Every toy has a lesson, and usually a haunted expression. Your favorite doll, the one with the porcelain cheeks and glass eyes, looks like she's witnessed something unspeakable. You love her, but you also sleep with one eye open, just in case. Even games come with a warning. Blind man's bluff? Too chaotic. Marbles, a choking hazard and a slippery slope to delinquency. If you want to play a game, it must involve geography, cautionary rhymes, or the proper way to greet minor nobility. And remember, no mess. Ever. Mealtimes are a ceremony of restraint. You sit upright. You eat what you're given. You do not ask what's in it. The answer is always goodness, which usually means flour, water, and fear. There is no idle chatter. You may speak if asked a question by an adult, and only then if your mouth is empty and your soul is pure. Mistakes are inevitable. That's why proverbs exist. Drop a fork and you'll hear, "Cleanliness is next to godliness." Spill the milk, and someone mutters, "Waste not, want not." Complain about your porridge, and you're treated to a tale about a boy who once dared to frown and was immediately struck down by fate, indigestion, or the bishop. You begin to realize that affection here is not warm or casual. It's conditional, structured, and oddly disciplinary. If your mother scolds you 3 times in one morning, it means she believes in you. If your father glances up from his newspaper when you enter the room, it's a kind of blessing. If your nanny says nothing at all, you may have finally earned her respect. Or she's planning your next handwriting drill. You learn to measure love in sighs, corrections, and the rare nod of approval when you manage to sit through an entire supper without swinging your legs or asking what a boiled suet pudding actually is. And still, there are small joys. A raisin in your porridge, a smile from your sister before bedtime, a whispered joke about Cousin Edgar's enormous ears, quickly stifled, of course, because in this world, even laughter has a curfew. Childhood in a Victorian household is not about freedom. It is about formation. You are not being raised. You are being carved. Slowly, quietly, and with a firm belief that if you just follow the rules long enough, one day someone will finally say, "Well done," and they'll mean it. Probably. It's dinner time, and in this era, it is a test, a sacred ritual of status, self-control, and silent judgment. You do not eat in the Victorian household, you perform nourishment, and you'd better get it right. Seating, of course, is not random. Your father sits at the head of the table naturally. He carved the roast once in 1859 and has been praised for it ever since. Your mother sits beside him, upright and attentive, positioned to correct the children without interrupting the flow of gravy. You, on the other hand, sit wherever there is room that doesn't imply entitlement. And you don't dare serve yourself. Food follows a strict hierarchy. Father is served first. Meat, potatoes, and all the trimmings. He needs strength for moral leadership and long, unreadable silences. Mother comes next, because even in this rigid society, we pretend to respect the woman who keeps everyone alive. Then, if you have not been caught misbehaving, asking foolish questions, or looking whimsical, the food may reach you. Third, but even then, proceed with caution. The portion you receive is proportionate to your perceived virtue that day. Did you misquote scripture this morning? Slightly less cabbage. Did you forget to curtsy to Aunt Millicent? No gravy for you. And once the food is in front of you, your challenges are just beginning. You must sit perfectly still. You must use the correct fork, even if it's for something unidentifiable and jiggling. Your elbows? Nowhere near the table. Your fingers? Nowhere near your face. Conversation is not banned, merely strangled into submission. Acceptable topics include your father's view on tariffs, recent events in Crimea, or the moral failings of the butcher's youngest son. Unacceptable topics include frogs, fun, feelings, and anything that might hint at indigestion, joy, or France. Should you say something inappropriate, like, "I saw a funny squirrel today," there will be a pause, a long, cold, soul-shrinking pause, and then your mother will quietly say something like, "We do not speak of silliness at the table," while gently removing your dessert plate. If the offense is severe enough, the spoon may come into play, not as a weapon exactly, more as a gentle instrument of moral correction. A quick tap on the knuckles, a slow scrape across the plate for emphasis, a clink that says, "Never again, my dear." The spoon has spoken. Meanwhile, your father clears his throat to mark a conversational pivot, and your mother cuts her meat into precise, graceful triangles while telegraphing to you, through narrowed eyes, that your posture could use improvement. Dessert, if permitted, will be something beige and untrustworthy. Custard, perhaps, or a pudding that jiggles like it's trying to escape. You eat it without expression. Emotion has no place here. And when it's all over, you stand. You thank your parents. You bow slightly at the table itself, just to be safe. And then you leave the room backwards, without turning your back on the roast. Because in this house, dinner is sacred, and sacred things are not to be trifled with. Welcome to the drawing room. You may look, but you may not lounge. This is not a place for comfort. This is a showroom, a carefully curated shrine to good taste, tight upholstery, and the ability to sit motionless without sneezing. Everything in this room is decorative, fragile, and slightly hostile. The chairs are stiff-backed. The wallpaper is floral. There is a tea tray that looks inviting, but is actually a test of your dexterity and restraint. If you're under the age of 18, your role in the drawing room is mostly ornamental. You may be summoned to recite a poem, demonstrate your Latin declensions, or be gently corrected for how you walked into the room in the first place. You do not sit unless invited, and you are not invited. The correct posture is upright, alert, and slightly apologetic. Hands in lap, feet together, eyes forward. You are not here to participate. You are here to witness civility in action. Conversations in the drawing room are governed by strict, invisible rules. There is an etiquette manual somewhere in the house, possibly two, that outlines acceptable topics, approved gestures, and how many seconds of eye contact are considered morally appropriate. Stirring your tea too loudly is borderline scandalous. Slurping is a cardinal sin. Laughter is permitted, but only if it's the refined kind, the delicate ha-ha reserved for well-timed witticisms about parsonage scandals or the peculiar way Mr. Bunting holds his walking stick. Anything louder than a chuckle might be interpreted as emotional instability. An emotion, of course, is French. You may admire a painting. You may compliment the stitching on a cushion. You may comment on how fine the weather would be, hypothetically, if one were to go outside, which no one is suggesting, obviously. If your mother is present, she is likely engaged in needlework while pretending not to listen to the conversation. In reality, she is absorbing everything. Your father may be reading the newspaper with such intense focus it suggests war is imminent. Meanwhile, you are quietly reviewing the proper way to pour tea in case you are ever asked to do so, which you won't be, but still, appearances must be maintained. Sometimes guests come. They sit on the chairs you're never allowed to touch, sip the tea you're never allowed to spill, and make small talk so refined it could be printed in a hymnal. When they leave, your mother will say, "Wasn't that lovely?" And you will nod, because that is the only correct answer, regardless of how lovely it actually was. Then she will inspect the tray, note the number of biscuits taken, and interpret the guest's social standing based on how much cream they used. Eventually, the fire is banked, the curtains are drawn, and you are released. Quietly, carefully, without disrupting the lace. The drawing room remains untouched, preserved like a fossil of polite society, ready to perform its duties again the next time someone knocks at the door with gloves and a calling card. In the Victorian household, this is what relaxation looks like: upright, silent, and vaguely nerve-wracking. Be grateful. You've just survived another sitting. You may live in a respectable Victorian household, but make no mistake. The nursery is a monarchy, and Nanny is the queen, not the soft cookie-baking kind. No. This is the iron-willed, starch-collared, emotionally impenetrable ruler of your waking hours, and also your sleeping ones, and sometimes your digestive ones. She knows everything: where your socks are, how many raisins you stole, what time you coughed last night. She doesn't need to ask questions. She simply knows. Her presence is so commanding that even the wallpaper behaves when she walks in. You refer to her only as Nanny, because to suggest she has a first name would be wildly inappropriate. You've seen her smile exactly once. You were 4. It was unsettling. The nursery looks sweet. At first, a few wooden toys, a rocking chair, a fire in the grate. But don't be fooled. This is a place of order, not whimsy. Every toy is rationed, every blanket folded with military precision, and every emotional outburst is met with the look. You know the one. It's not angry. It's not even disappointed. It's calm, controlled. It says, if you drop that biscuit again, I will remove it from your life and you will write a letter of apology to the Queen. Toys are not freely available. They are kept locked in a cupboard that only Nanny can open, with a key she wears on a chatelaine at her waist, next to the scissors, the smelling salts, and your deepest fears. You may be granted a toy if you've earned it. If your posture was correct, your recitation flawless, and your hair brushed in the Anglican direction. Then, you may be handed a wooden horse. For exactly 30 minutes, bedtime in the nursery is sacred. It occurs at precisely 6 p.m. regardless of season, weather, or your personal objections. You are scrubbed, dressed, and deposited into bed while it is still bright outside and other people are visibly enjoying themselves. The curtains are drawn, the candle is snuffed, and Nanny hums a lullaby that sounds suspiciously like a hymn about obedience. Should you protest, a cough, a whimper, or the unforgivable sin of asking for water, Nanny does not scold. She simply stands, slowly, silently. And you remember that you are very small, and she is not. If all else fails, there is the soothing syrup, a teaspoon of it, and you'll sleep like a stone in a field. You won't dream, you won't twitch, you won't even remember what your own hands are for. It's labeled for nervous children, and yes, it contains opium. But don't worry, it's for your health. Nanny says so. In the rare moments when she does sit, always in the same high-backed wooden chair that might as well be a throne, she doesn't knit, or doze, or daydream. She watches, she assesses, and she calculates how best to produce virtue from your tiny, chaotic existence. A wrinkle in your stocking, noted. A missed please, logged. That time you rolled your eyes when asked to recite the Lord's Prayer, filed away for future corrective action, possibly involving cod liver oil or a lecture on the perils of idleness. Still, there's a strange comfort in her tyranny. Nanny may not be warm, but she is always there. And in a world full of lace, judgment, and unspeakable puddings, predictability is its own kind of love. Besides, you'd rather take your chances with Nanny than explain to your mother why the doll's head fell off again. One stare from that chair, and you'll never misplace a toy soldier again. In theory, Victorian family life follows the same basic structure. Parents at the top, children at the bottom, guilt somewhere in the middle. But in practice, everything depends on class. And class, in Victorian Britain, is everything. It decides what you wear, what you eat, who raises your children, and whether you pronounce your H's. It even decides what kind of misery you get to enjoy. Let's start with the upper class. The aristocrats, landed gentry, and people with names like Lady Featherstone of Gloucestershire. If you're born into this life, congratulations. You will never boil a potato or hold your own umbrella. Your household includes a rotating cast of butlers, governesses, footmen, cooks, and a woman whose entire job is just to iron gloves. You are technically a parent, but only in the most ceremonial sense. A governess will raise your children, teach them French, and scold them for crying during Latin drills. You, as the mother, are expected to look decorative at dinner and occasionally inquire about your daughter's posture. As a father, your duties include fox hunting, letter writing, and producing stern expressions at important family portraits. You may nod approvingly at your offspring from time to time, ideally while standing near a fireplace. Affection is measured in inheritance. Emotional expression is reserved for your dogs. Next, we arrive at the middle class, the engine of Victorian morality. Clerks, shopkeepers, schoolmasters, minor civil servants. People who are one bad financial decision away from utter disgrace. Here, the mother does everything. She raises the children, manages the household, maintains appearances, and supervises every crumb of toast. There may be a maid, if funds allow, but otherwise it's all on her. The children are not free range. They are under constant moral surveillance. Every choice, from sock color to spelling errors, is a reflection of the family's respectability. You are not just raising children. You are cultivating reputations. The father, as always, is the invisible banker of the household. His presence is implied, like God. In this class, affection exists, but only if it's disguised as duty. A mother may say, "You've grown," which means she's proud. A father may say, "You'll make something of yourself yet," which is as close as you'll get to a hug. And then there's the working class. If you are born here, the concept of childhood is mostly theoretical. You work as soon as you can walk. You sweep chimneys, carry coal, match wits with industrial machinery, and still get told off for missing your prayers. The entire family works. The entire family contributes. And dinner, when there is dinner, is a loaf of bread, some dripping, and whatever could be bought with half a shilling and a solid glare. There are no governesses, no drawing rooms, no quiet moments with embroidery. Your house has one room, maybe two. The baby sleeps in a drawer. The laundry hangs above the fire. Someone is always ill, but life must go on because there is no alternative. And yet, there is love. It just looks different. Your mother may not kiss you, but she'll give you the larger crust of bread. Your father may not say a word, but he'll wrap your feet in his coat when the frost comes early. Affection here is practical. It's measured in spoons of gruel, hand-me-down boots, and a warm seat near the hearth. In all classes, Victorian family life is about sacrifice, just scaled differently. In upper-class homes, you're sacrificed to tradition. In the middle class, to reputation. In the working class, to survival. But wherever you are, one thing is clear. Childhood is not for leisure. It's for learning how to endure. Congratulations, you're of marriageable age, which, in Victorian terms, means you've reached the precise moment when your family begins treating you like a cross between fine china and diplomatic cargo. You don't fall in love, you enter negotiations. Courtship is not about chemistry, it's about compatibility, by which we mean money, manners, and the ability to endure small talk without passing out. As a woman, your role in this ritual is to be visible, virtuous, and pleasingly mute. Not entirely mute, of course, just lightly conversational. You may express mild enthusiasm about seasonal flowers, but never politics, digestion, or your actual emotions. You dress for the occasion, layers of lace, modest charm, and just enough perfume to imply freshness without ambition. The goal is to attract a suitable suitor, ideally one with solid income, decent teeth, and no obvious scandal. If he has a title, even better. If he has opinions, don't worry. They'll be edited later. As a man, your job is to appear responsible. That's it. If you can stand upright, own a watch, and refrain from spitting, you're already ahead. A proper courtship takes place under supervision. You do not go for walks alone. You are escorted. You do not exchange letters freely. Your correspondence is monitored by someone named Aunt Judith, who reads your metaphors for tone. Any flirtation must be subtle. Eye contact across a parlor, a carefully folded fan, a shared appreciation for morally uplifting literature. The height of Victorian seduction is asking, "May I call again?" and waiting 3 weeks for an answer. And then comes marriage, or as the Victorians might say, the final stage of personal freedom. Marriage is not about happiness. It's about respectability. It is a business arrangement wrapped in tulle and sacred vows. You are not choosing a soulmate. You are selecting a co-manager for the brand that is your family. If you are a woman, you gain a new name, a new house, and a lifetime supply of unpaid domestic duties. You may also gain children, social obligations, and the creeping realization that your husband thinks reading novels is dangerous. If you are a man, you gain a cook, a laundress, a moral guardian, and someone to remind you not to speak with your mouth full in front of the vicar. Divorce? Technically possible, socially catastrophic, legally exhausting. Unless you are extraordinarily wealthy or in possession of a scandal so grand it makes the newspapers weep, divorce is not an option. You made your bed. You will now lie in it, possibly forever, with someone who chews loudly. Most women do not expect romance. They expect stability, a home, a role, some thread of security in a world where women own almost nothing, not even the money they marry into. Occasionally there is affection, a shared glance, a quiet chuckle over a poorly boiled potato, but it's a slow warmth, not a blazing fire. Victorian love, if it exists at all, must be whispered into the corners of a room filled with duties and doilies. And yet, people endure. Not because it's easy, but because it's expected. Because family is sacred. Because scandal is worse than sorrow. And because once the rice has been thrown and the lace veil folded away, what remains is the unspoken truth of Victorian marriage. You may not be happy, but at least you're not alone. It's Sunday morning, which means it's time to wake up, lace your boots, straighten your collar, and prepare for several consecutive hours of sanctified discomfort. In the Victorian household, Sunday is not a day of rest. It is a day of piety, posture, and pretending you're not cold. Your entire family files into the pew like a row of emotionally repressed sardines. You don't fidget. You don't slouch. And under no circumstance do you smile, even if the hymn is about joy. Especially if the hymn is about joy. After church, you return home for a quiet afternoon, which involves more scripture, less soup, and the looming threat of a second sermon, possibly delivered by your uncle, who has opinions about the evils of card games and knees. Sundays are sacred, but not in the fun way, and that's just routine. Holidays are where things get truly exhausting. Take Christmas, for example. You might imagine laughter, music, and generous helpings of pudding. But Victorian Christmas is less festive cheer and more structured obligation wrapped in holly. There are rigid expectations. Presents must be practical, children must recite verses, and no one opens anything until Father declares it morally appropriate. Your stocking contains a tangerine, 3 walnuts, and possibly a stern pamphlet on moderation. You thank everyone profusely and do not ask for toys that light up, make noise, or encourage freedom of expression. There may be carols, but only those that emphasize divine judgment or social order. The meal is heavy, overcooked, and sacred. Your role is to be grateful. Loud chewing is frowned upon. Visible joy is suspicious. Then there's mourning, which in the Victorian world is practically its own career. When someone dies, and someone always dies, The entire household enters a period of codified sorrow. Black clothing, black ribbons, black gloves. Emotionally, spiritually, and sartorially black. The mourning period varies by relationship. A husband, 2 years. A cousin, 6 months. A goldfish with good character. A discreet weekend of contemplation. Some women wore mourning for so long, no one remembered what they looked like in color. Others followed half mourning, which allowed muted lavenders and gentle sighing. The point is to show restraint. Loud grief is considered distasteful. Quiet devastation is more respectable. And if you manage to embroider a mourning handkerchief with tiny initials while weeping silently, congratulations, you are the ideal Victorian widow. Even your pets might require mourning. If the family cat passes away, the children may wear black armbands. You are expected to mention it solemnly, then move on, preferably with a proverb about eternal rest and clean habits. And of course, there are portraits. Family photographs are grim affairs. Everyone looks vaguely unwell, deeply serious, and ever so slightly disappointed. No one smiles. Why would they? This is not a moment of delight. It's a visual testament to duty. The camera requires long exposure. You sit still. You don't blink. You do not express joy, because joy is fleeting, but social respectability lasts forever. Sometimes, tragically, people were photographed posthumously, propped up, eyes painted on, one last portrait before burial. And yes, someone had to dust them afterward. Victorian family rituals weren't about fun. They were about form. Form meant order. Order meant virtue. And virtue, as your mother reminded you, was far more important than comfort. So when the holidays come, you don't ask for what you want. You accept what's given. You fold your hands. You lower your gaze. And if you're really lucky, someone might let you light the pudding. Briefly. You are 10 years old, which means your days of carefree innocence, or whatever passed for it, are officially over. If you're a boy, this is the beginning of your working life. If you're a girl, you've already been working. And you'll keep working, quietly, invisibly, and with very little applause. Let's start with the boys. By age 11, you're either in school or off to earn your keep, possibly both. You might be an apprentice to a blacksmith, a runner for a newspaper, or one of the unfortunate souls tasked with cleaning chimney flues, which sounds charming until you realize it involves soot, claustrophobia, and the occasional rat. But there's a silver lining. Once you've officially entered the workforce, you're exempt from things like dishwashing, hemming, and helping your mother carry anything delicate. You are now a working male, and that means you get to lean against walls, wear a cap, and say things like "long day" while avoiding eye contact. If you're a girl, your path is far more consistent. You rise early, tidy the hearth, mind your siblings, peel something starchy, and try not to breathe too loudly while folding laundry. You may attend school if your family can spare you, but only until you're needed at home again. Your future is already being rehearsed. Care, serve, smile, repeat. School, for both genders, is not the whimsical chalkboard utopia you might be imagining. It's cold. It's cramped. It smells faintly of ink and despair. You sit at wooden desks so hard they could double as pennants. You dip your pen into ink, ruin your sleeves, and then get smacked for smudging your copybook. Lessons are not creative, they are corrective. You recite multiplication tables, moral proverbs, and poems about obedience. You're taught that laziness leads to ruin, and so does pride, and so does joy, frankly. The safest state of being is quiet industriousness, preferably while being slightly hungry. Teachers are strict, discipline is admired, and if you manage to avoid the cane, you're having a great week. You might be tested in arithmetic, reading, and religious instruction. You will not be tested in happiness. And then, for many children, there is work. Real work. The kind with injuries. You might be sent to a textile mill, a match factory, or a coal mine. You're small, and that makes you useful. You can fit between gears, under tables, and inside crawl spaces where fully grown misery cannot reach. The hours are long, the noise is endless, and the foreman does not care that you're 12 and missing a shoe. Breaks are rare, safety is optional, but if you do your job without complaint, you might earn a few pennies, enough to buy a half loaf of bread, a boiled sweet, and 5 minutes of feeling like you've achieved something. Occasionally, the family celebrates your meager paycheck with a toast. Not champagne, toast. Literal toast. Burnt at the edges and shared like treasure. That's your prize for surviving the week. But there is pride too. Strange, stiff-backed, soot-covered pride. Because in Victorian Britain, children were not spared from adulthood. They were trained for it. Hard work was virtue. Exhaustion was noble. And childhood, as we think of it now, was a luxury reserved for fairy tales and the upper crust. You didn't dream of becoming an astronaut. You dreamed of boots without holes, a roof that didn't leak, a day without blisters, and, if you were very lucky, a future that involved fewer chimneys, though no promises. You live in a respectable Victorian home, which means someone, and we all know who, must battle the daily war against dust, soot, and moral decay. That someone is not your father. He has opinions about wallpaper and firm thoughts on chimney drafts. But his contribution to cleanliness stops somewhere around noticing things. And it's not your brothers. They're either at school, at work, or pretending to read serious books in serious chairs while crumbs fall invisibly to the floor. No. The burden of cleanliness, like nearly everything else, falls on your mother, and, if applicable, you. Because you're a daughter. And in Victorian Britain, that's less a role, and more an unpaid apprenticeship in sorrow. Housework is not occasional. It is relentless. The kind of ongoing effort that never ends. It just resets, like a miserable carousel powered by sweat and disappointment. Let's talk about laundry day. It's not one day. It's more of a laundry epoch. First comes the soaking, clothes stewing in buckets of brownish water like unfortunate vegetables. Then boiling, scrubbing, wringing, drying, starching, ironing, folding, and eventually sighing. Lye burns the skin. Steam fogs your face. Your knuckles are raw. The water's never clean enough. The linen's never white enough. And somehow you've lost a sock even though no one owns enough socks to spare one. The drying lines sag. The ironing board groans. And if someone has dared to wear a collar with starch that wasn't fresh, well, you might as well cancel Christmas. Cleaning the house is a separate endeavor entirely, one that begins early and ends only when someone collapses into a faint, or the furniture sparkles with barely disguised resentment. The floors must be swept, scrubbed, dried, and, if you're very proper, polished with beeswax until the entire hallway becomes a passive-aggressive skating rink. The fireplace must be emptied. The ash must go somewhere, though where, no one ever says. The windows must gleam. The drapes must not hold odors. And the air, ah yes, the air, must smell like virtue, which is to say, bleach. because only when the chemical sting of carbolic acid hits your nostrils harder than the smell of wet wool and moral fatigue is the house considered clean. And through all this, you're expected to be cheerful. Cheerful, ladylike, modest, and humming something vaguely religious while your wrists give out and the kettle boils dry. If you cry, it's quietly, behind the kitchen door. If you complain, it's as a joke. And if you succeed, no one mentions it, because cleanliness is expected, not celebrated. This is the unspoken gospel of Victorian womanhood, pride in suffering. The more thankless your labor, the more admirable your soul. The more invisible your effort, the higher your moral standing. Pain, after all, is purifying. At least that's what the etiquette books say, probably written by men who've never touched a mop in their lives. So you scrub, you sweep, you scrub again. And if someone walks in, breathes deeply, and says, "Smells clean in here," you'll smile, politely, and wait until they leave to mutter something less polite under your breath. You are seated at the table, halfway through a piece of dry toast, when it begins. Someone, an aunt, a grandmother, a particularly confident neighbor, leans in, lowers their voice, and bestows upon you a piece of eternal wisdom that defies science, reason, and often gravity. "Don't read too much," she whispers, as if the books can hear. "Your eyes will fall out." You blink, slowly, but it's too late. The warning has been issued, and now you must live with it. In the Victorian family, advice is a generational sport. It arrives uninvited, usually wrapped in superstition and tied with a ribbon of anxiety. And it is always delivered with grave authority, even when it's based entirely on hearsay, folklore, or that one neighbor who once fainted after sneezing near a lemon. "If you cross your eyes," another voice says from across the parlor, "they'll stick that way." You nod solemnly. You don't believe it, but you also don't not believe it, because this is Victorian Britain, where medical journals share shelf space with ghost stories, and the line between remedy and curse is blurry at best. Health advice, in particular, is an entire genre of its own. Have a cough. Must be the damp, or weak nerves, or an overabundance of melancholy in the blood. Someone suggests a syrup made of treacle, vinegar, and something that smells like shoe polish. Someone else recommends vigorous prayer. Another voice adds, "Try holding a hot potato under your arm while whistling. Works every time." And you believe them. Because everyone seems to believe them. Because it worked once, allegedly, in Devonshire. There's advice for everything. Don't go outside with wet hair. Not because you'll catch cold, but because the devil might enter through your scalp. Always wear wool, even in July. The sweating is proof it's working. If your tea is too hot, wait 3 hours. Anything quicker is impolite and medically irresponsible. Romantic advice is no better. Never trust a man with 2 first names, your mother says, folding laundry with the precision of a military drill. Always marry a man who takes his hat off indoors, your grandmother adds, without looking up from her embroidery. And never sit on a gentleman's lap, Aunt Maud chimes in, unless he's proposed or is at least very near death. You try to take it in stride. You smile. You nod. You make a mental list of all the rules, half of which contradict each other and most of which involve mold. Because yes, even mold gets involved. There's bread mold for skin rashes, cheese mold for lung congestion. One terrifying neighbor insists mold is full of healing vapors, and she's still alive, so that apparently counts as proof. The thing is, none of it's meant to hurt you. Victorian family advice, for all its absurdity, comes from a place of deep, anxious love. A love that doesn't quite know how to say, "I care about you." So it says, "Don't whistle at night. Eat your crusts, they'll curl your hair. Sleep facing east, that's how angels know where to find you." And somehow, you feel safer. Even if you're now deeply afraid of lemons, eye strain, and sitting near windows during a full moon. You wouldn't know it from the lace curtains, the Sunday prayers, or the swarm of children in the parlor. But somewhere behind the embroidery, the hymns, and the endless teacups, a quiet revolution was taking place. In a world that expected women to bear children as faithfully as they polish the silver, something was shifting. A whisper, a hesitation, a decision made behind closed doors and under candlelight. Maybe not another one. Middle-class families, especially those with tight budgets and tighter hallways, began to practice something shocking for the time: birth control. Not openly, of course. That would be indecent, and possibly illegal, depending on how publicly you said it, but discreetly, strategically. And with all the secrecy of a secret society, couples began making choices. And the reason was simple. Children were exhausting. They were expensive. They were loud. They broke things. They needed food, clothes, shoes, and schooling. And after child number 5, even the most pious Victorian mother began to consider that perhaps her uterus deserved a vacation. Enter vulcanized rubber. Invented in the 1840s, it revolutionized more than just boots. With it came early versions of condoms, washable, reusable, and sold quietly through coded advertisements. Protective sheaths, marital aids, French goods. If you knew what to ask for, and where to ask, you could walk away with a little less future in your pocket. Of course, these products weren't readily available to everyone. They were expensive. They were fragile. And they required literacy, discretion, and a certain level of social privilege. So the people who benefited most were, predictably, the ones who already had the most to work with. Educated, urban, middle-class couples. Doctors, in private, began advising certain patients to limit family size for the sake of a woman's health. Rest the womb, they'd say quietly to middle-class wives. Spacing is sensible. But these same doctors rarely offered that advice to the working class. Because among the poor, large families were still seen as inevitable, even necessary. More children meant more potential wage earners, more hands, more resilience. Birth control for the working poor was not an option, it was a fantasy. They had no access to sheaths or syringes or the mysteriously named preventive powders. They had folk remedies, old wives' tales, and a rotating list of ineffective herbs, which meant more pregnancies, more loss, more risk. For middle and upper class women, the child limit quietly became 3 or 4. For working class women, it was often as many as the body could bear. But still, the change had begun. Women were talking to each other, whispering in sewing circles, sharing tips behind nursery doors, sending coded letters. The shift wasn't in policy. It wasn't in headlines. It was in kitchen whispers and unspoken gaps between siblings. A quiet, stubborn act of autonomy. Because even in a world that told women to obey, endure, and reproduce endlessly, some of them began saying no. Not loudly, not defiantly, but consistently. And in doing so, they made space for rest, for survival, for the idea that a woman's worth wasn't measured in bassinets or gravestones. It was the beginning of a very slow revolution, one whispered under breath, hidden in drawers, and paved quite literally, in rubber. You don't remember learning how to walk, but you do remember your first Bible verse. It's everywhere, embroidered on the cushion, painted over the fireplace, hanging above the stairs in stern Gothic script. A house is not a home unless there's a framed warning about sin near the dining table. In the Victorian household, religion is not a part of life. It is life. God watches. God listens. God takes notes. And if you so much as sneeze without a handkerchief, someone somewhere is certain it's the first step toward eternal damnation. Church attendance is mandatory, not strongly encouraged, not recommended. Mandatory. Rain, illness, household fire. It doesn't matter. You will go. Even if you have a fever, even if you're unconscious. If you can be propped up and wheeled in, congratulations. You're spiritually covered. Missing a sermon is a moral failing. Missing two is a spiritual emergency. And once you're there, you sit up straight. You follow along. You nod gravely at the appropriate moments, even if you're too young to understand what's being said, especially if you're too young. Because Victorian morality isn't about clarity, it's about submission. Children are raised not to explore right and wrong, but to absorb it, like wallpaper paste. You're taught that virtue is quiet, that obedience is godly, that guilt is proof you're paying attention. Which brings us to the family's favorite bonding tool, guilt. Guilt is everywhere. It is passed down like teacups and gout. Your mother uses it gently, like a pastry brush. Your father uses it with silence. Your aunt uses it with sighs so heavy they could flatten a cathedral. Guilt teaches you how to sit, how to speak, how to pray, with just the right mix of devotion and terror. You don't want to go outside and play because it's Sunday. And you don't want to go inside and nap because idleness invites the devil. So you sit quietly in a room smelling faintly of boiled socks and judgment, reading Psalms and wondering if laughing too loudly yesterday means you're going to hell. Probably. And still, it's all done in love. Because moral instruction is considered the greatest gift a Victorian parent can give. They don't talk about feelings, but they will write you a 4-page letter on self-restraint. They won't praise your artwork, but they will admire your ability to sit perfectly still for 47 minutes while someone reads from the book of Deuteronomy. Morality is not just preached. It's baked into daily life. You do not run indoors. That's selfish. You do not waste food. That's ungrateful. You do not speak unless spoken to. That's safe. And if you dare to express an opinion, it must be morally sanctioned, biblically adjacent, and end with the phrase, God willing. There are no gray areas in Victorian morality, only sin and discipline. And as a child, you don't just fear doing wrong, you fear being wrong. But still, there's comfort in the structure. It's all so rigid, so absolute, so deeply embroidered into the very fabric of your waistcoat. You may never relax. You may never express joy without second-guessing it. But you'll be clean. You'll be correct. And you'll always have something to feel quietly ashamed about, which in Victorian terms is practically a moral triumph. Your family has a pet, not because anyone in the household particularly loves animals, but because pets, like prayer books and posture rods, are believed to be morally instructive. Your dog is not there for snuggles. He is there to teach you loyalty. Your canary, obedience. Your hedgehog, humility. And if you happen to enjoy their company, well, that's just a fortunate side effect, not the point. In the Victorian home, affection is reserved for God, Queen, and perhaps the family Bible. Not fluffy creatures with souls of uncertain theological status. Still, pets are popular in their own rigidly supervised, morally purposeful way. Dogs are often seen as noble companions, as long as they're quiet, useful, and not prone to emotional neediness. Small lapdogs are acceptable for the ladies, especially if they sit nicely and don't drool. Large dogs, like retrievers or hounds, are fine for the gentleman, particularly if they hunt things and remain stoic while doing it. Cats? Well, cats are a bit suspicious, too independent, too secretive, likely aligned with some sort of spiritual mischief. You may keep one in the barn for mice, but don't expect anyone to write poetry about it. Birds, especially canaries, are ideal for the parlor. They chirp prettily. They don't shed. And they can be trained to reinforce the idea that joy should be contained in a cage and expressed only at approved decibel levels. Hedgehogs, believe it or not, are sometimes adopted by the children, not because they're cuddly, but because they're small, manageable, and profoundly unimpressed by everything. A perfect Victorian role model. Of course, pets also come with lice, fleas, mites, ticks. They're inevitable. You scratch quietly during breakfast. You blame the upholstery. You thank Providence that small infestations are considered a sign of lively domestic life. The point is not cleanliness. The point is discipline. If your pet misbehaves, it is corrected. If it dies, it is mourned, but only briefly. Emotional attachment is fine, in moderation. When your pet passes, you dig a neat hole, say a proper hymn, and shed a single tasteful tear, possibly indoors, preferably alone. No shrieking, no wailing, no building a shrine. A child who mourns too loudly is seen as dramatic. A child who doesn't mourn at all is concerning. The correct response is gentle solemnity, followed by doing the dishes. And yes, there may be a tiny headstone, something that reads, "Here lies Pip, faithful, tidy, and not at all spoiled." That's the goal, after all, not just to enjoy the company of a creature, but to become better because of it. Victorian pets are meant to teach you how to love, quietly, responsibly, and with emotional self-restraint. So you pet your dog without smiling. You feed your canary without humming. You say good night to the hedgehog, even though he doesn't care. And you grow up just a little more proper, a little more patient, and possibly just a little bit itchy. You're sitting in the drawing room, admiring the wallpaper. It's a lovely shade of green, elegant, tasteful, just the right hue to impress visitors and poison your lungs. Because, and you may want to brace yourself, that charming botanical pattern was likely printed using arsenic-based pigments. That's right. The wallpaper is trying to kill you. In the Victorian household, beauty was non-negotiable. You must demonstrate taste, refinement, and social class, even if it slowly poisons your entire family. Arsenic was popular because it made colors more vibrant, especially green. That crisp, mossy, fashionable green. It's called Scheele's green or Paris green, and it's absolutely lethal. The dust particles flake into the air. The damp releases it into the room. And the more stylish your parlor, the more you cough. But arsenic isn't the only silent decorator at work. Your armchair, stuffed with asbestos. For insulation, of course. You wouldn't want your furniture to be cold and emotionally distant. Your children's toys, painted with lead-based pigments naturally. It gives them that rich, saturated look. just before it gives your toddler anemia and neurological damage. Even the curtains have it out for you. That's not just velvet. It's flammable velvet. Fireplaces are cozy until a gust of wind sends a spark into the folds of your favorite damask drapes. And because every surface in your house is made of wood, lace, gas, or toxic optimism, the whole room becomes a bonfire in under 90 seconds. Let's not forget the nursery. Supposedly a safe haven for children. Realistically, a death trap with doilies. The cradle has sharp corners. The rattle is made of pewter and rage. The soothing syrup for teething contains opium. And if the baby stops breathing, well, at least she looked elegant. But here's the thing. No one sees any of this as a problem. Because in the Victorian mind, the home is sacred, a moral reflection of the family within. If you suggest that the wallpaper might be a tiny bit deadly, someone will accuse you of being ungrateful, unladylike, or worse, French. Instead, you suffer politely. You cough into lace handkerchiefs. You rotate your chairs to avoid drafts and exposure. You discourage children from licking the wainscoting, though honestly, that should have been obvious. And through it all, survival becomes a kind of etiquette. The goal is not to avoid danger. The goal is to outlast it gracefully. A true Victorian hostess can serve tea, discipline a child, and not faint, all while slowly inhaling her wallpaper. So you keep living. You keep decorating. You keep hosting dinner parties under gaslight, wearing flame-retardant undergarments and a hopeful smile. Because in this house, death may be lurking in the parlor paint. But manners, my dear, manners will see you through. There are rules, not written down, of course. That would be vulgar, but understood. Etched invisibly into every doily glance and raised eyebrow in your Victorian household. These are the unspoken social codes, the silent gospel of how to behave, survive, and not cause a scene. First, always refer to people by title. Never use a first name unless you're married to them, related by blood, or trying to insult them in public. Your aunt is Aunt Penelope. Your father is father. Your grandmother is grandmother, even if she's been dead for 6 years and just refuses to lie down about it. The baker is Mr. Crenshaw. The vicar is Reverend Biddle. The postman is Sir if he's over 40 and looks stern. Everyone must be addressed in a way that reflects their role, their status, and your awareness of both. And if you forget, a long, frosty silence will follow, possibly a sermon. Secondly, and this is crucial, never contradict a relative. Not even if they say Queen Victoria invented thunderstorms, or that your cousin's third rash is caused by excessive piano playing. You nod. You say, "How interesting." You excuse yourself to check on the tea, even if there is no tea, even if there never was. Disagreement in this house is not a form of discussion. It's a declaration of war. Then we come to crying. Crying must be performed silently, preferably in a dimly lit room, possibly behind a plant, ideally somewhere no one can hear your disgraceful sniffles echo off the wallpaper. Loud crying is for opera singers and unstable widows. If you absolutely must express sorrow, do it with a quiet exhale, a trembling chin, and a lace handkerchief that smells faintly of starch and regret. For children, the expectations are even stricter. Children speak only when spoken to. Ideally, not even then. A child's voice in the drawing room is like thunder in a library, unnatural, shocking, and guaranteed to summon a lecture on respect. Your job as a child is to sit still, listen intently, and absorb moral lessons through osmosis. You do not ask questions. You do not make jokes. You do not share your opinions unless they're on punctuality or how to properly fold a napkin. In Victorian households, silence is golden. Stillness is holy. And being seen but not heard is considered the peak of childhood development. But here's the twist. Everyone knows the rules, but no one explains them. You're just expected to sense them through tone, through glances, through the subtle tightening of your mother's mouth when you accidentally said yes instead of yes, Father. Social codes are absorbed, not taught. It's less like learning etiquette and more like navigating a haunted maze, where the ghosts are all your relatives and the walls are upholstered in moral judgment. And yet somehow, it becomes second nature. You learn to curtsy at the correct angle. You learn which silences are polite and which are reprimand loading. You learn how to exist within a household where the greatest virtue is discretion, followed closely by restraint, neutral facial expressions, and the ability to make emotional suppression look graceful. You may not have freedom, or affection, or dinner until the adults are finished speaking, but you have manners. And in Victorian England, that means you're doing just fine. You are a child, but that's not your primary function. No. In this household, you are a status symbol. Your value is not based on your charm, your giggle, or your ability to climb a tree without crying. It is based entirely on your clothing, your posture, and how convincingly you can conjugate Latin verbs while standing very still. If you belong to the upper class, congratulations. You will be raised not by your parents, but by a rotating cast of governesses, tutors, and emotionally repressed nannies. You'll see your mother twice a day, once in the morning for a vague inspection, and again in the evening for a formal goodnight that feels like a diplomatic farewell. Your father? He may nod at you across the drawing room if you've earned it. But don't mistake absence for neglect. Your role is not to be loved. It is to be presentable. You will learn French by 6, Greek by 8, and how to politely suppress all emotion by 9. You will be paraded in front of guests like a porcelain figurine that happens to breathe. You will curtsy, quote something classical, and then be dismissed. If your socks are wrinkled, the family is disgraced. If you slouch, the empire trembles. For the middle class, things are different, but no less performative. Your parents raise you directly, and they take it very, very seriously. You are their personal project. Your mother trims your fringe to an exact angle. Your father insists on moral instruction during breakfast. And your outfits? Immaculate. You are dressed like a small ceramic angel, all lace collars and restrictive velvet, even if you're just going outside to look at a tree. Your shoes are polished within an inch of their lives. You are taught to speak clearly, walk slowly, and never express an opinion louder than a polite cough. You may not feel like a symbol of your family's social aspirations, but your embroidery sampler says otherwise. And then there are the working class children. You don't have a governess. You have a job. You're 6 years old and you already know how to fold a shirt, gut a fish, and keep your mouth shut around the landlord. If you're lucky, you go to school in the mornings and work in the afternoons. If you're not lucky, it's just the chimney or the factory or the bakery, full-time, no questions asked. You wear hand-me-downs. You eat bread. Your greatest achievement is not dropping the coal bucket. But even in this world, there is pressure. Pressure to be polite, to be useful, to make your family look good even when you all sleep in the same room and share one tin cup. Because respectability isn't just for the wealthy. It's a national obsession. And children, regardless of class, are walking proof of how well a family is performing its assigned role. Posture is everything. A straight spine suggests discipline. A tidy hairstyle suggests order. A child who says thank you while carrying a sack of potatoes suggests that Britain is still the finest empire on earth. So you carry yourself carefully, whether you're wearing silk or soot. Because in Victorian society, being a child isn't a right, it's a presentation. And heaven help you if you smudge it. You want your family to be seen as respectable, not happy, not affectionate, not particularly close, just respectable. That's the gold standard in the Victorian world. The quiet, neatly ironed illusion that everything is fine, no one is emotionally unwell, and your children absolutely never scream into their pillows or throw jam at the curtains. Success is measured not in joy, but in containment. A successful Victorian home is quiet, not peaceful. Quiet. No shouting, no giggling, no doors slamming or footsteps pounding up the stairs. If someone is crying, they're doing it behind a lace screen. If someone is furious, they're politely drinking tea until the emotion dies of boredom. Laughter, if it happens, is carefully rationed and usually involves a mild pun about the vicar. A quiet household suggests control, discipline, an unspoken agreement that nobody will embarrass anyone else, especially in front of the neighbors, because neighbors are always watching. The second, and perhaps most crucial, the measure of success is reputation. Your family must be seen as proper, which means dressing appropriately, walking at the correct speed, never showing up uninvited, and pretending that no one in your household has bodily functions. Appearances are everything. Your curtains are inspected. Your lawn is judged. Your children's socks reflect your spiritual cleanliness. You are not just a family. You are a display, one that should never, under any circumstances, be associated with scandal, eccentricity, or passion. Even if you are deeply unhappy, it's far more respectable to repress it. That's the third metric of success, emotional suppression. It's not that feelings aren't allowed. It's that feelings are risky. They lead to mess, to conflict, to poor posture and red eyes, and, worst of all, unpredictability. A successful family knows how to feel nothing in public and just enough in private to avoid a full collapse. This is taught early. You learn to smile softly, not too brightly. You learn that "I'm fine" is not a statement, but a lifestyle. You learn that any real distress can be postponed until bedtime, and even then, must be expressed into a pillow in complete darkness. And what about the children? They too are success symbols. A clean child in public, even if they're secretly full of lice and unresolved rage, is worth more than any heartfelt conversation. Your little ones are scrubbed, combed, stuffed into stiff boots and moral superiority. They say please. They say thank you. They sit through church without fainting. If they twitch inappropriately or misquote scripture, you correct them gently but firmly, and make a note to pray harder. Because in this world, successful parenting doesn't mean raising happy humans. It means raising well-behaved furniture, seen, silent, and polished. And if your child eventually grows up into a quiet, competent adult who suppresses joy and responds to compliments with mild horror, that's not failure. That's a generational achievement. You've successfully passed on the essential Victorian legacy, the ability to be emotionally barren while appearing absolutely fine. Bonus points if your adult child still irons their socks and feels a strange sense of guilt when sitting in a messy room. Ultimately, Victorian family success is a performance, a slow, rehearsed, symmetrical performance that says, we are normal, we are upright, we are never sad unless someone dies, and even then we do it tastefully. There are no gold stars, no graduation ceremonies, no big family hugs around the piano, just small nods, tightly clenched smiles, and a lovely new hat for being quietly excellent. So if your house is still, if your reputation is intact, if your child remembered to say ma'am instead of mum in front of the rector, congratulations, you've made it. Victorian success achieved. So now you know. Behind the perfectly pleated curtains, beneath the layers of lace and lavender water, Victorian family life was not exactly warm. It was respectable, structured, immensely well-dressed. But warm? Only if you sat too close to the gaslight and no one noticed your sleeve catching fire. You've survived the day. A small miracle in a home where feelings are rationed and wallpaper might be poisonous. You remembered to bow before breakfast. You avoided making eye contact with the patriarch. You passed the jam without incident and only cried once, silently and in Latin. That's what success looks like here. You've learned to sip tea without emotion, to nod at advice you didn't ask for, and to keep your voice at the appropriate indoor repression level. Your mother is quietly exhausted. Your father is somewhere behind a newspaper. Your siblings have all been corrected into submission. And you're tucked beneath layers of wool blankets, atop an asbestos-stuffed mattress, beneath curtains dyed a shade of green so vivid it could almost be fatal. But don't worry. You are safe. Not in a modern sense, not in a breathable fabrics, regulated chemicals kind of way, but safe in the sense that you fulfilled your role. You were seen, not heard. You sat up straight. You didn't say the word fun at dinner. And somewhere, buried under generations of lace and inherited guilt, your Victorian ancestors would be proud. So rest now. Let the coals settle in the grate. Let your thoughts drift past the parlor screen and into sleep. You've earned it. And if you didn't, well, don't worry. Someone will write a moral pamphlet about it in the morning. Good night. Sleep deeply. And I'll see you next time. Unless you sneeze without permission.